So I'm not used to being behind a lectern. I usually like to wander around on the stage, so if I get a little cagey behind the lectern, you'll understand why. So first of all, let me ask the panel members to come up so that we can get them introduced to you. And then we're going to have a little conversation about sort of what we see going on, and particularly in the fact that last week was Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, where lots of announcements come out from various both operators and vendors, and what some of the implications of that are. But let's start out by going through and introducing our panel, and maybe we'll just go from this end to that. Sumeet, why don't you start and introduce yourself, what you do, and we'll go on down the line here.
All right, sure. Can you hear me at the corner there? This works? All right, okay. So I'm Sumeet Arora, and I have the pleasure and honor of leading the service provider routing business at Cisco as part of the overall SP team. So I come from engineering, and I'm super happy and thrilled to be here amidst you.
Hi, I'm Bevan Slattery, founder of a few companies like NextDC and Superloop and Megaport. So I'm a bit of a network junkie from quite a long time, and kind of in the more recent years, kind of found my way back to Cisco from the kind of 90s and early 2000s. So I think I'm a bit more of a service provider representative on here to give you my kind of view on how things are going.
Morning. I'm Mark Chapman. I'm with Telstra, and I'm in the product organisation. So I look after our data and IP products for our customers domestically and also internationally, which is more of a subsea capacity business. But I've also just recently made the change from the mobility portfolio, so I'm sort of spanning that bridge at the moment.
Yeah, I think I introduced myself before, but I'm actually the sales guy, you know, who will actually, at the end of the day, come to you to sell some of the stuff.
So you're not our friend?
Yeah.
So let me start by talking a little bit about what we're seeing and what's in the industry around 5G. Seems to be the theme everywhere. But the nature of what 5G has changed from an industry perspective over the last 3 years. And the way I think about this is every year there's a big talk in January at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, which is typically keynoted now these years by somebody from the mobility industry. And if you listen to it about 3 years ago, that we're talking about 5G, all about the radio and all the things the radio are going to do. And then 2 years ago, or the year before this year, they started to say, well, it's not just the radios, it's all the networks are going to have to transform, and the networks are the things that deliver the services became the conversation. And what are the implications of those changes of the networks? And if you look at what happened this year at Consumer Electronics Show, it was, we need to start talking about how we're going to make money with 5G, because if we're going to build these new radios and we're going to build these new networks, how are we going to pay for them? What are the services we're going to sell? And that has really transformed. If you look back at Mobile World Congress this year, or just last week, a lot of the conversations were about how now the service providers need to go after not just the traditional sort of consumer revenue through mobility, but also much more into the enterprise space. So I think you heard Sanjay talk about the sort of the flatter, the agile network, which is really sort of the network transformation, but also the data centers where the applications are coming from, but also the tie into the enterprise. And these are very much in line with the themes we're seeing over the last 3 years of the evolution about the conversation of 5G. And now, this year, is really going to be the interesting year, because we're seeing not only new network operators come into the market, but all of the traditional sort of mobility providers are really standing up 5G radios and starting to provide services and trial services around the globe. So there's a lot of activity this year with the race to achieve who's going to be the next king in terms of the mobility space with 5G. And at the same time, we're starting to see all of the operators that have not traditionally provided mobility get into the mobility business. So we see cable operators around the world getting into the mobility business because the idea of access is becoming less important, and it's more about the services with the access becoming independent, yet everybody wants to provide more mobility because it's the easiest way to get last mile and now high-speed last mile. So with that, what I'd like to do is go to each of our panelists and ask for some perspective on 5G, what you think it means and what it means in your business and your business space. And maybe, Bevan, I'll start with you in terms of, what do you think about 5G, its implications? How do you think about it in the context of your business?
Yeah, thanks. When I think of 5G, I think you look at the growth we saw, 2.5G, 3G, 4G. They were actually, it was just more speed effectively, right? More data, those kind of fairly simple things. It was the same product in many ways. It was just faster. But the thing with 5G and the timing of 5G, but with virtualization, with cloud, cloud RAN, cloud core, those things, there is a series of things that are combining, with 5G. Small cells, MIMO, you talk about beamforming. There are so many technologies that are actually being enabled by cloud. So when I think of 5G, I think of all of those things coming. And so for me, I think 5G and cloud and virtualization together is going to be probably the single most transformative event really since we kind of went from, I think, almost analog to digital mobiles. And part of that's because the variety of options that you can deliver to end customers as a product is going to be so flexible, so capable of differentiating itself. It's not going to be about here's your SIM plan, here's how much data. It will be about here's your SIM plan, here's how much data you're going to be able to download and how many voice minutes. But when you're talking about virtual, we can literally give you a slice of our network and spin it up for you, and you can connect to it as an enterprise. You want your own virtual LTE or virtual 5G network. We will slice part of our network and we'll give it to you so it's as if it's your own network. You know what I mean? So it's having that flexibility, having that capability is remarkable. And the amount of bandwidth that you're going to be able to get out of that, the amount of connectivity you're going to get out of that for, I think, the price point, I think is going to be simply one of the most transformative things that's happened. For my business, I don't do mobile historically, but from a Megaport standpoint, which is certainly all about interconnection, we think obviously virtualization is having a massive impact on our business in a positive way. We do a lot of hybrid cloud connection. We only see that massively increasing, and I think we're going to see carriers and enterprises, service providers and enterprise doing more direct connections between each other as part of that kind of abstracting or slicing up some of those network capabilities and hand the customer. So I think there's going to be one of the most fundamental changes we've seen in the connectivity space with 5G and cloud and virtualization than we've seen in decades.
Right. So maybe what I'll do is, Sumeet, I'm going to go to you next from a very different perspective, since you lead a lot of our product development in the service provider space. What is changing for you in terms of how you think about product development and bringing them to market with all of these changes going on?
Sure, Collin. So I think, I think the first thing that we always think of in our product development is our customers. And I think when it comes to 5G specifically, we're extremely focused on the profitability of our customers. That is number one goal for us. And then we drive innovation from that goal in terms of how do we leverage technology and our capabilities, the assets, to enable profitability, new revenue streams. So that is a big focus area for us. Now, translating that to technology innovation, I think what we are looking at clearly is leveraging all the assets that Cisco has from a technology perspective. Now that means networking assets, clearly IP networking, includes data center assets, includes automation. Everything has to be automated. includes enterprise services, includes security and trust, and of course the packet core that we have. So we look at all these assets, and we look at an architecture that would enable that profitability goal, which in our opinion really ties to the top three things that SPs care about. One is network leadership, which is, in my opinion, can be called innovation leadership. So how do we partner on that front with all these assets? And second is end customer experience, because any transformation, whether it's any industry, any company, it's about that customer experience. And the third, of course, is all the capacity stuff, which is normal but important, right? So I think we are focused that way, Collin and team, to leverage all those assets. And then, of course, there's a lot of exciting details on the technical side, and hopefully we'll go through that as we talk further.
Great. Thank you, Sumeet. So, Mark, you have the privilege of working at Telstra. You have wireline networks, you have mobility, you have B2B services, all of which are top of the conversation for 5G and transformation. And how's Telstra looking at that, and particularly looking at this, thinking about money and revenue streams and moving into 5G? Easy question for you, right?
Easy question.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that if I was sitting on a blueprint right now about how to make as much money out of 5G as carriers made out of 4G, I think I could name my price on the global market. I think it's pretty unobvious about how we actually monetize, because if you think about the context in which 5G enters the market and the process of monetization. Back with 2G, you were monetizing voice. 3G, we had this great idea about text, and that made us a bomb of money, even though it was a very simple and low bandwidth service. 3G to 4G was all about the monetization of data. And actually, you don't actually monetize the underlying berry, you monetize the user experience that sits on top of it. And 4G was just a beautiful convergence between a couple of things. User-created content, the smartphone, and 4G technology. And when those things came together, you create the opportunity for monetization that I think we've all done pretty well out of. The challenge is now, if you look at that same 4G market context globally, I think it was led by the North American market, but we're no different in Australia, is that you were competing in the market, trying to keep your ARPUs up, trying to keep your cash high, and doing that by competing at a headline on how much data you give away, until inevitably you get to a point of unlimited data. And at that point of unlimited data, your opportunity to then incrementally monetize disappears. And so the real challenge we have now is that's the context in which 5G is landing, where the tethered capacity, so stuff that's connected by blue wires that would rather be mobile, that would benefit from 5G but can't benefit from 4G, that's really unclear at the moment. And so the thing that we kind of need to wrestle with is where does that monetization come from? I think another fact that's really challenging for us is that we're talking as service providers about big investments to cover large areas. I have no doubt that the enterprise segments themselves will be able to make good money. I have no doubt that folk like Cisco, there's massive opportunity in more of the private 5G networks, so campus networks. Our miners in Australia use 4G private LTE networks to cover their mine sites more cheaply and effectively than Wi-Fi. So the real challenge is how do we get mass market use cases that will pay the bills for the network rollout in the context of all these challenges. And I think whilst the answer's not obvious, I think the flexibility of the network and having, I think to your point, a network that's physically flat but logically quite complex is actually the key. So we look at where's the customer who's willing to pay an extra $10 for a mobile connection that has different characteristics. And so you look at Fortnite gamers, you talk to parents, and the language apparently that's used is it's lagging, Dad. The network's lagging. I'm about to die because the network's lagging, right? And so there's a question there about what if we can create slices through the network that utilise 5G's opportunity for low latency, maybe put some compute at the edge and actually deliver a gaming experience that someone's willing to pay an extra $10 a month for. When you think about what enterprises are willing to pay for, maybe it's traders, the ability to actually create a low latency slice through the centre of the network is really important. And so finding those use cases that you can get that extra $5 or $10 for is super, super important as we sort of move to 5G. And I think the other side of it is actually cost and how we manage cost, where we ourselves are in a pretty exciting space at the moment where I saw a demonstration just 3 or 4 days ago. Particularly for enterprise customers, serviceability and managing serviceability is really hard in telco. So telco, you typically have built up a business over 10, 20 years. Your service models are inconsistent because you've built them over 10 to 20 years. I saw a demo the other day where it started with undifferentiated cloud capability, and one of my operators pressed a button and it spun up in the cloud some virtualized network functions, one of which was a listener for a piece of IP equipment at the edge of the customer network, and the other was a piece of software that would aggregate, analyse and alarm. So the ability to spin up virtual network functions on the cloud that we can provision in real time mean that we can take massive cost out of the provisioning and actually create consistent serviceability models where we're very clear on what the customers get as part of the basic service because we're a premium service provider, and then where the monetisation opportunities are to help our customers outsource their management of their networks. So I think there's no really clear use cases except for fixed wireless in certain geographies, but there are some significant pointers to what we need to be thinking about, which is slices that have particular characteristics that people are willing to pay a bit more money for, and operational models that are super intelligent, run in real time, and allow us to take significant cost out of the way that we run our networks.
So if that's a very thorough answer, so I appreciate that. But I heard a couple of things. One is that, industries, you definite point here in industries, I think we're seeing that pervasively in a lot of the conversations is how to address industries. Very big focus on the customer experience. How many people have teenagers? We get ready to pay $10 a month extra for a gaming experience for the teenagers, and anything else that you need a higher quality. And really reliability and the ability really to focus on how you do that network at a lower cost but a higher serviceability. So thank you very much for that. So Sanjay, we're going to come to you, but I think that what we want to do is take advantage of the fact that you have the entire APJ region, including India and Japan and all through ASEAN and Australia. You probably see lots of different perspectives on 5G, which are both different operators, but also different countries and approaches to that. Maybe you could kind of give us a little perspective on what you see as sort of the evolution and the differences across the region.
Sure. No, thank you very much. I think, as I said before, this region is so diverse. One day I'm with the operator in Korea, KD and SKD, who are really about to launch. I think March they will go live with their 5G network. And then you go to Japan, they're almost there, to go launch in the next 3 to 6 months. And you guys in Australia are already testing it. But what is common among all the operators across the region is that everybody is thinking about 5G. And I can tell you 80% of them have not figured out how to make money out of it because they're...
Can you the other 20? That'd be good.
So, the ones that think they will make, yeah. All right, so I think it's really, the big questions, if I sum up across all the operators that we talk in APJC is, how do you help me make money with this? Because clearly in some parts of the region, 4G, 3G was a misnomer. I mean, they never really got any return out of that. They started sunsetting that. Now 4G, they have been busy rolling out, and now suddenly they need to do 5G. But clearly everyone, which is common across all, are finding 5G as a great excuse to fix what they didn't fix over the years, which is explore how they get virtualization in, How do they get cloud in? And obviously, if you come closer to Korea and Japan, where there are some use cases are coming prevalent, for example, in Japan, multiplayer gaming is really seen as a consumer service that will do well. And I think I personally, you asked me if we have a teenager, I have one, and I know that will do well, in Korea, I think fixed wireless is kind of one use case which is common among all. But they're also seeing use cases for industrial IoT, right? I think these are specific, somewhere for manufacturing, some in the automobile space and so on. And I think, so I think this is a little bit, work in progress, but clearly the requests are, how do Cisco, that's why I said in my introduction earlier, how do we bring in the attributes of our learning in the enterprise space to the SP networks? Because clearly SP is now in a sweet spot. I think traditionally they did an awesome job building the networks, creating bandwidths and the smart pipes, but that was it. You actually end up giving them bandwidth connectivity. They needed to solve for policy, for security, for analytics. I believe with attributes of 5G like network slicing, Bevan, I think you clearly articulated that, and serviceability. I think you can really extend that slice to that enterprise, and using these attributes probably create a monetization for yourself. But I think it's too early really, what will fly. So idea is to go out and experiment. Something will for sure.
So Bevan.
Yeah, I think one of the single biggest use cases for 5G and why some service providers struggle with it is, I think it's the first time you can genuinely cut the cord, right? And I think that is part of the opportunity, but it's also part of the disruption is that, you know what I mean? And a good case is the NBN here in Australia. If someone rolls out the network at scale with cloud, it's built on cloud, it's built on 5G. Most of the residential users, shouldn't say, you look at the transformation of people who used to have a landline that no longer have landlines. They've kind of cut the cord. They don't have a landline at home. When you look at the youth, and what Geo's done overseas, I think 5G is the first technology that has the latency and the throughput capability and potentially the price point through through being able to use different vendors' equipment and wide boxes on the end of the network effectively, that I think you can actually cut the cord. So from an integrated telco that does everything from fixed line to mobile, they probably can't quite see it, but if I was if I had many billions of dollars and I wanted to kind of shake it up, I see 5G as the opportunity to say, you know what, I'm going to own no fixed line. I'm just going to go out there and offer broadband plans that, unlimited broadband, as you said, and you're going to put a hockey puck and you're going to stick it on top of your fridge, and that's your Wi-Fi 5G hotspot for the flat, for the apartment, for the house. It'll give you hundreds of megs, unlimited bandwidth for the family, and off we go. I think that is the one of the biggest opportunities in this space, and I think fixed line operators have to be aware of that, and they have to kind of, particularly the NBN, they have to be aware of that, and they really have to look at modifying potentially some of their models.
Yeah, so I think we've talked about the cord-cutting generation as people sort of getting off of particularly television, cable cut television and wireline telephone, but you're saying internet, period, really becoming a cord-cutting generation coming, which I think is a lot of the promise. We'll see what the actual reality is. And this is where I think that, one of the things that we really see is that, we mentioned there's a lot of people trialing 5G right now. If you look around the globe, almost every operator is declaring some sort of innovation lab or some sort of trials around 5G, where they're looking at everything from fixed wireless access to all sorts of different business services. And that it's really the belief that the opportunity is there, but not really a full understanding of how to turn it into the financial return. So it's a very interesting, exciting time around that. So maybe let me change and talk a little bit more on the technology side, really about sort of network models and operating models. And I know, Sumeet, you're probably chomping at the bit to talk a little tech here, so I'm going to start with you, and maybe you could talk a little bit about what you see as changing in network architectures and how you are helping drive that, and thinking about operating models of those new network architectures?
Sure. Thank you, Collin. So I think I could sense the excitement from the panel on the topic of slicing. So clearly, I would be remiss if I don't allocate a slice to it.
Yeah. If you say slicing near Sumeet, he'll smile. So just when you see him in the hall, just walk up to him and say slicing.
So I think clearly from an innovation perspective, we are, whether it's the IP network, whether it's the packet core, whether it's the data center assets, we are working to create that ability to deliver slices that essentially map to application and experiences. So slices are the way to deliver experiences for our customers, and we are putting the technology in today to do that. And I was reading a survey recently, and we see about 50% of providers that are actively studying, certifying, deploying slicing capability in their network right now. So it is my humble request, not as a Cisco leader, but more as a service provider community member, that everyone should make sure that when we build out the network, when we build out infrastructure, we build out in a way that it is not just for mobile broadband, but it is for the ability to deliver applications and experiences via slicing over the next decade. So that's one thing, and we are putting in place that capability. The second piece is we are absolutely marrying everything that we do with automation. So from an operating model perspective, when you look at our data center assets where you may be hosting packet core or network services, we have our ACI solution, which fully automates the life cycle there. Similarly, for the whole WAN fabric, all the way from cell site to the data center, that whole path is essentially SDN transport. So having the ability to deliver simplified slicing via segment routing and traffic engineering at scale, and then being able to manage these slices, the entire life cycle through automation, is very critical. So automation everywhere, in everything we build. So that's the second tenet. The third tenet, from a technology perspective, we all talked about how beautiful 5G can be, how disruptive can be. I agree. I think one of the other things is the threat envelope is going to massively expand. So the amount of IoT that is coming, those networks, the densification of the wireless network, just the densification alone is estimated to be 15 to 20x increase in the envelope. So a big investment for us, and this is not anything to do with any geopolitics. We have been working on this for 8 years, and last 4 years frantically, which is how do you make sure everything in that infrastructure can be trusted, and you can actually measure and verify that trust. That the hardware is not, it is what it's supposed to be, the software is what it is supposed to be, and it's exactly working the way it is. So those three tenets are absolutely critical from an innovation and technology perspective that we're building in.
Great. So, Mark, I'm going to go to you next. And I think what I'd like to particularly hear is, so Telstra has a large established network infrastructure, operating models that have been in existence throughout the entire time of Telstra, obviously. And as you look towards 5G, how are you thinking about that differently? How are you thinking about transformation? What are the things that you're thinking about change? What's going on at Telstra?
Yeah, look, interesting question. It's a pretty broad question, but I'll pick up on the slicing piece and how
Sure.
we think about it. There's a part of slicing that actually comes from an engineering imperative. So it's not even about monetization. It's about the fact that I think a lot of people in the room will know that Telstra had some mobile network outages late 2016. I suspect that if my media people were here, they would tell me not to talk about it. But essentially, that outage wasn't about how the network went down. The problem with the outage was how the network didn't come back up. And the reason the network didn't come back up was because there was avalanche traffic on the signalling plane at a level that was just unexpected. And the reason that you've got avalanche traffic on the signalling plane at a level that's unexpected is because of the myriad of devices that are now attached to the network beyond just the straight mobility. So the engineering imperative is we need a slice to effectively isolate the best effort IoT plane from the rest of our network, just to make sure that we can assure the key cash cow of our mobile network appropriately. So that's a very engineering-led imperative. I think beyond that, I think another reality, picking up on the themes that I was speaking about before, is we're probably at a point where, for the first time in our history, we're really facing questions of the bandwidth exceeding, or the demand for bandwidth increasing quicker than we have the capital to fill the holes to build it out. And when you look at that, there's actually an implication that no one likes to talk about, which is you're actually going to start to degrade network quality and the user perception of network quality. And so you kind of get to a point where you have to think about whether you need to actually bifurcate in the market on quality of service. So if you want a general all-you-can-eat plan for a price point that is mass market, maybe you have to have a different network for that versus a premium network for business-to-business users that you're actually assuring the experience all the way through and guaranteeing bandwidth. So actually being very real about the capacity bandwidth economics, the implications on congestion, and how you actually manage and monetize that is something that we're also thinking about from a slicing perspective. So I think there's very real implications from a monetization perspective about how that technology is brought to bear in your design.
So, thank you. I'm going to start, Bevan, I'm going to ask you one question on this. I'm going to unfortunately ask you to be brief because I want to get to one more topic before we close. And I'd particularly like you to take a point of view, because I know that Megaport is very much focused on virtualization, but also physical network and how those two would come together. Where do you see the marrying of those things, and why it's important to have both well established? In 30 seconds or less.
Megaport's not just software, it's also, okay, so in 30 seconds, it's great to have virtualization, but unless it's close to the edge and you have interconnections at the edge and infrastructure at the edge to be able to do the compute side and the interconnection side, it's just software. So the marrying of software and interconnection and pushing that out as close to the edge as possible is what makes it valuable. This is what we spoke about before. So I think, we're doing something right now with Cisco. We're deploying UCS and currently about 18 cities around the world. We're in 80 cities around the world at the moment, but we're doing Cisco Compute at a lot of those. We'll end up having Cisco Compute at all of those. So any one of our clients can spin up a slice or a virtual compute or an interconnection, but importantly, they can actually do that right at the edge. So if they're trading on NYC, there's compute there. If they're trading at Chicago, it's there. If they're doing movies in LA, it's there. So for us, we absolutely have to marry them both together to be within a millisecond of what the requirements are.
Great. So since you have the mic, I'll take the next thing to you, which you sort of started into. But as we look at this next generation of sort of building out networks and this opportunity and this transition where everybody's trying to figure out the best way to monetize, where do you see execution models changing, and in particularly partnership models changing? And how do you view that going into this sort of transition of networks and the way networks operate?
That is a very good question. Again, I'll wear my Megaport hat for this one. We've made sure that we're a neutral, independent party that provides elastic connectivity to all the major cloud providers in nearly every major market around the world. So whether it's a telco, whether it's an enterprise, or the cloud providers themselves, we think the partnership approach is really important. We've built everything on APIs from scratch so that any one of our partners can use this platform exactly the same way we do. We ate our own drank our own champagne. I used to say eat our own dog food, but we drink our own champagne. And so I think when you actually build these networks on scale, you've got to be building it for partnership at the core, which means your development platforms should be API driven, and you give your clients and partners that same access. I think that's really important.
So I think that means you've had business success when you're drinking your own champagne instead of eating your own dog food.
We always used to say eat your own dog food, but then someone said, really? You should be drinking your own champagne. I said, that was a salesperson, by the way.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. All right, so Sanjay, I'm going to go to you on this one because I think this is something that you're interacting with lots of different companies around the region, and there's how Cisco is partnering, but how they're partnering with other companies as well, the partnerships with Cisco and other companies to help the providers. Can you give us a sort of perspective on what's changing and what you see is happening?
No, I think, honestly, I think we're reaching a stage in this industry where unless you partner holistically, you're not going to make it, right? So I think, telcos, that's how they really made big, those who made big in a previous era. And then I think the whole thing started to commoditize, and we came into this, era of, lowering everything, every cost bit that was there in the pie. But I think we're reaching a stage where I think my sense is operators that will lead and succeed in the coming digital era is those who can create this holistic partnerships, because I think nothing is perfect, nothing is, I can't say as Cisco that I have all the solutions you need. I think we have to co-develop them together. So I think that's kind of one piece. And for us, I think we have to be responsible citizens. We know, I think I quoted it that 80% of them don't have a clue how to make money out of this. So I think it's our responsibility that when we come with that partnership proposition, I think it is addressing the three tenets. First, how they will make money out of this. Second, how does it lower their current OPEX, because that OPEX pile is so huge. And the third one, how do we make it pervasive security, which is, because that's becoming really, really critical. So these three things should be embedded in that core of that partnership.
Great. So I think just want to summarize some things from the panel so far, right? I think what we're hearing is lots of change, lots of new opportunity, but lots of unexplored opportunity as well across the whole space, from what we see in terms of how the operators are thinking, from in terms of how people are thinking about where they're going to make money, and what the quote killer app is for all of this really cool technology. So I think this is where, when we sit in the room as engineers, we're really excited about a lot of the technology. And when we sit in the room as business people, we're sweating because all that technology costs money that we have to spend, but we have to pay for that, and we need an ROI. I think this is really the great mystery of 2019, that I believe by the end of, as we enter 2020, we're going to see some of those killer use cases really coming to the fore, and that's when the race really starts for 5G. And I'm looking forward to that myself. So I want to say thank you to our panel members, and I'm going to ask Chia to come back up. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all the panel and Collin.